Welcome, everyone. This is the part 2 of season 2 in the Keio International Christian University Linguistics Colloquium. I'm Seunghun from International Christian University in Japan. Today, we have two exciting talks by Timo Roettger from University of Osnabrück and Chong from Queen Mary University of London. Shigeto Kawahara from Keio University will introduce Timo first.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Shigeto Kawahara from Keio University. It's my great pleasure to introduce Timo, who is soon becoming an associate professor at the University of Oslo, skipping his assistant professorship. So Timo's research interests include a wide range of topics, but there is one very special topic which requires everybody's attention right now, I think, which is how we should do quantitative research in linguistics. So if you don't know Timo's work, there are a few papers that I really highly recommend. First, if you haven't read his lab form paper on researcher degrees of freedom in phonetic research, you should really read it. Second, if you're interested in Bayesian modeling, but are too scared of learning it, go read his tutorial written with Dr. Franke. And if you have time to do so, I really encourage you to go to his website where you can see that he pre-registers all of his experiments. And it seems like that will become a standard in linguistics as well. So today was the first time I actually met Timo, but his research activities recently have had significant influences on my thinking about how to do my own research as well. So without further ado, let's hear from Timo.
Timo, we cannot hear you.
Oh no. So Timo, does he realize that?
I'm sorry, something
yeah.
happened. I need to start the keynote again, and you should see it in a second. Give me a second. So now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much for the introduction and those kind words about my methodological perspectives on things, and I hope other people find it useful as well. Let me see whether I can start the presentation again. I'm really sorry that this is a little inconvenient. I'm using Keynote, and Keynote is not particularly well cooperating with other programs. That's why this might be a little clunky here, but I promise it's worth it. Keynote produces very, very pretty slideshows. Still starting the slideshow. Because it's so pretty, it's rather large, and that's why it takes a while. I'm sorry.
Maybe while waiting, people can go check out Timo's website to see what I really meant. Oh, there you go.
There we go. You should see the slides now. Can someone give me a verbal thumbs up?
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. All right. Again, good morning, everybody. Sorry for this kind of hiccup here. I'm very excited to tell you about some of my maybe less known research today. Despite my recent psycholinguistic and methodological bent, Shigeto just mentioned some of my methodological work. I'm also actually pretty deeply interested in why languages are the way they are. So let's dive into that question a little bit deeper. And let's start out with, well, with singing apes. So in 1871, Charles Darwin noted that apes use sing-sang to express emotions and resolve issues related to territory and mating. And his ideas have been taken on by other scholars over the years, and all of them kind of assume that rhythm and melody plays actually a central role in the evolution of human speech. And let's face it, we are all kind of singing apes, right? We use rhythm to structure our sentences, and we use melody to express our intentions. Today, I'm trying to convince you that these aspects of speech, they help us understand why languages are the way they are. So the main idea today can be summarized as follows. The tune drives the text. That is kind of a catchphrase that me and my collaborators are throwing around for a couple of years now. And if you take anything home from today, this is the idea that I want you to carry with you and think about. So what am I talking about? So on the one hand, human languages have words composed of segments that express lexical meanings and signal relationships between words. So I crudely refer to this level as the text, that is text in text setting, kind of the carrier of a melody, okay? On the other hand, and largely independent of the text, there are rhythmic and melodic patterns, most notably intonation. And intonation here I refer to as the modulation of pitch to express non-lexical meaning. And we crudely refer to this level here as the tune, which is superimposed in the text. And we will learn that there are often conflicts between the text and the tune. Sometimes the tune cannot be realized because the text cannot carry the tune. And in these cases, in order to realize the tune, the speakers adjust the text, that is, change the form of the words. Intonation is a very important aspect of human communication. It can express emotions, speaker involvement, attitude, but it also plays an important role in linguistic organization. It can, for example, mark the difference between a question and a statement. It can structure the utterance into smaller, meaningful units, and it allows us to emphasize and de-emphasize units. Take, for example, our catchphrase here. One could imagine two different intonation contours for this utterance. In one contour, pitch falls at the end, something like the tune drives the text. And in another contour, the pitch might rise at the end, something like the tune drives the text. And if articulated by a native speaker of English, these two contours are very clearly signaling two different communicative functions. That is, one is a declaration of information and the other is a request for information, a statement versus a question. But this utterance contains a bunch of voiceless consonants, and that is a conflict. Voiceless consonants are characterized by the lack of vocal fold vibration. And when there is no vocal fold vibration, there is, at least in a traditional sense, there is no pitch. So pitch information on these consonants is more or less lost. So for pitch to be produced at all, we need voiced consonants. But even voiced consonants are not always ideal carriers of pitch, because most of them don't have a rich harmonic structure and are characterized by low periodic energy. To perceive pitch accurately, we need segments that are sonorous. And as it turns out, vowels seem to be very good carriers of pitch. So in reality, this sentence has really poor tune-bearing qualities here, right? Another issue here is the following. These pitch movements that are characteristic of certain communicative functions, they're not randomly spread out across the utterance, but they're instead occurring in very specific positions. For example, they often occur on very important words in the utterance or at the end of phrases. And if these positions are close together, as it's the case here with the word text, it can lead to so-called crowding of tones on one syllable, on one prosodic unit. The text may then just not offer enough space to bear a complex tonal movement. And especially, if the tune is complex and the syllable is short and contains voiceless segments such as the word text. Again, this is conflict. And this conflict between tune and text threatens the communicative function of pitch here. That is the contrast between a question and a statement, which is quite important. So the question I want to discuss with you here today is how languages resolve these kind of conflicts. Okay, to get an intuitive grasp of this issue, let's try it ourselves, okay? Bear with me. I would like you to pronounce this phrase you see here in two different ways. Once in a neutral way, maybe as an answer to a question, and once as a question, like when you're unsure about which superhero someone is talking about. So you're all muted, so there's no embarrassment. Try that. I will try it too. Okay. Statement: Captain America. Question: Captain America. Right. So far, so good. Now, let's take away all these great carriers of the tone, all these tune-friendly vowels. Now try and pronounce this word a couple of times at home. All of you, just try to get your articulators to coordinate, okay? Not easy, I know, but most of you are trained phoneticians, so I'm very confident that you're gonna manage. You got that? Now, try to pronounce this cluster as a statement versus a question, and do it out loud at home and see what happens. I know it might appear a little silly, but see what actually happens there when you try. Let me try it, okay? Statement: Kip milk, kip milk. And now a question: Kip milk, kip milk. Now, some of you might notice something here. So when I do it, and obviously I'm enunciating it in a particular way to make a point, but when I try to produce the rise in pitch for the question, I actually insert something vowel-like into the cluster, and this vowel can actually carry a substantial important aspect of that rising pitch movement. So, some of you might be like, well, what is this all like? What's this all about? Languages have vowels, right? We don't have to really think about this very construed situation. So what can we learn from this made up scenario? I will show you now that this is not far-fetched at all. This is an issue that actually arises in some languages. And here's hopefully a sound file that you all hear. I hope you heard it. Maybe someone gives me a verbal thumbs up that this actually came through.
Sorry, Timo, I don't think it's coming through.
No, I actually didn't hear it either.
Okay, let's try that again. It might actually not come through. And the problem with that is, in this case, I'm not able to produce that particular audio file. It's a pretty cool one. You will see in a bit what this sound file is supposed to sound like, or like at least you can make it up from the phonetic transcription. But what I wanted to show you here is that this construed example is not as construed because there are languages that really have phrases that have no vowels in them.
Timo, can you play it one more time? Do you mind playing it one more time?
Absolutely.
Shigeto, can you hear it now?
I heard it, and I know who said it too. I have the sound file too.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay, then let me play it again because it's worth it. This time I don't think it went through. Well, we'll see how that goes. Maybe we have a chance to listen to that particular audio later on again. So we transition to Tashleed Berber, and Shigeto just mentioned that he knows who that particular speaker was because he has the same sound file. That was actually Rashid Ridwan, one of my PhD supervisors. So Tashleed was the language that I worked on during my PhD. And Tashleed is one of 3 major Berber varieties spoken in Morocco. Most grammatical phenomena are well documented, and a great deal of work has been really done on its phoneme inventory and phonotactics. But up till the beginning of the 2000s, stress and intonation were largely uncharted territory. My research was kind of an attempt to explore this terre incognite. So I went on several field trips to Agadir in the south of Morocco, and by using traditional elicitation methods combined with controlled speech production and perception experiments, I try to work out how Tashleed speakers really use intonation to express pragmatic meaning. And why is this a worthy research goal? Well, Tashleed is really famous for its rare sound systems. And I think most phonology undergrads have heard of that language when it came to syllable structure. And here's an example. And again, I really hope that you guys hear it this time. I hope you heard this particular sound file. If not, you can kind of see how just mind-boggling this particular sentence is to someone coming from a different language. And here you see the phonological representation of the sentence. Tashlahid allows utterances that do not contain a single phonological vowel. And in some very rare occasions, an entire utterance might contain voiceless segments only, as it's the case in this phrase. And here is the audio, hopefully, for you guys. So in these cases, the phonetic possibility to modulate pitch.
I'm sorry, Timo, can you play the first one more time? Apparently it didn't play, but the second one played well. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try the first one again. And if you have not enough of it, let's listen to the crazy voiceless one again. All right, now you probably have enough of Tashlahid already. In these cases, the phonetic possibility to modulate pitch is to say at least very limited, okay? The transmission of the tune and in turn the meaning it expresses is clearly endangered in these contexts. And Tashlahid has a rich melodic structure. Here's an example of two speakers playing a map task. One speaker is the instruction giver and has to navigate the other speaker through the map according to some landmarks. And this setup creates a rich communication context, elicits common pragmatic functions such as, for example, question-answer pairs or repairs, focus, etc. Let's have a listen.
تاني تبدو يا زهرة عنيت تسيت لخطراتي تساقات دوق ضيديك دونس دوق ضيديك تزريت داح في كين تقمي احنا قرا قضيت نقرا تقمي ياك بلاتي تزريح الخط غير في الدوق ضيد يا ساكحتي كين تقمي بلاتي نقرا تقمي دوق ضيد باش تطولي تفلا.
Right, I hope through the audio it becomes clear there's extensive use of melody and rhythm in this language. It doesn't sound odd or anything. They don't seem to struggle to realize the tune either, do they? Right? So they find a way to resolve this tune to text conflicts. The question is, how do they do that? You might have noticed in the first example, let's listen to that again, that these consonant clusters often occur with vowel-like sounds. Again, the words of this utterance do not contain phonological vowels, but when speakers pronounce these vowels, they actually realize vowel-like sounds, right? And from now on, I will refer to these particular sounds in Tashlahid as schwa. Just as a reminder, schwa is the term for a central vowel. And these schwas here do not show any signs of being part of the phonological system. They do not contrast with other vowels. They are optional. They do not interact with any other aspect of the sound system, except they might enable tune to be realized. So what happens when a communicatively relevant melody cannot be realized because the word doesn't contain a voiced segment? So this here is an example of how a prototypical question looks like in Tashlahid. What you see here in gray is the waveform in the background, and the thick black line indicates the pitch contour. And speakers go up and pitch on the final syllable of the final word, as you can see here. This would sound something like this. Isi na imi nu na badan. Right? They go up. They almost go into falsetto at the end, clearly up. When the final word is voiceless throughout, as it's the case for tsh, we obviously have a functional conflict again, right? We cannot produce this pitch movement because there's literally no pitch. The way we express the lexical meaning demands voiceless segments. The way we express pragmatic meaning demands voiced elements, ideally vowels, right? And this is what happens in these cases very often. They produce a schwa-like vowel that allows you to realize some part of the pitch movement. So this would sound something like right? Where there's not much space to realize pitch, but at least the difference between the mid to the high pitch can be realized, and therefore you can keep the functional contrast alive. And this can be observed for different tunes in different positions. Here you see intonation contours for questions on the left column and characterized by a phrase final rise fallen pitch. And the right column, you see a contrastive focus on the phrase medial word highlighted in blue here. And that is characterized by a rise fallen pitch on that word that is highlighted in blue. And I want you to direct your attention to that highlighted word, right? And let's listen to these two cases again. First, the question on the left hand. And then a contrastive statement.
إن إلدي أبداً.
Right? In the question, there's not much pitch action going on the word, actually. It's relatively flat because the critical pitch movement happens on the right edge of the phrase. In the contrastive focus case, there is a prominent rise fall on that word. Now, when the phrase medial word happens to be voiceless, the tune of the question is functionally speaking in good shape because the important tune comes later. But for the contrast, the characteristic tune would be lost. The insertion of a schwa would create phonetic space for the rise, fall, and pitch to be realized. And that's what happens. And let's listen to these two examples. Question.
إن تسخف أبداً.
And the contrastive statement.
إن تسخف أبداً.
Okay, so there is clearly a symmetry here. And when you quantitatively look over these cases across a corpus, in this case, a speech production data set from 20 speakers, it suggests that this functional relationship is mirrored in the frequency of occurrences of these schwas. More schwas are observed in contrastive environments in which pitch is really functionally relevant. And this holds for many other pragmatic contexts too. This is not just cherry picking for a particular function. So Tashley tells us something about how language can resolve functional conflicts between tune and text in a noticeably extreme situation. But if the tune needs to be realized, the text changes. In this case, non-lexical vowels can be inserted in order to make sure the tune and its meaning is really transmitted accurately. But I gotta admit, Tashlahit is an extreme case. You have no reason to believe that this is happening in any other languages, right? But I want to show you that even amongst rather well-documented languages like Italian, we find similar patterns. In Italian, as you might know, who speaks English or German, has often a particular accent that many can easily identify. And one core feature of this accent is the insertion of word final vowels after consonants. And this can also be observed when Italian speakers pronounce loan words that end in consonants, such as tech terms borrowed from English. So here's an example of a news anchor talking about social media habits at work.
Quanto tempo perde chi è al lavoro con Facebook, il più famoso dei social network? Moltissimo, perché le aziende corrono ai ripari.
We're interested in a question as to whether Facebook, social, or network end in a consonant like they do in English, or in a schwa-like vowel. Here's the part I'd like you to listen to again.
Con Facebook, il più famoso dei social network.
And I hope you can hear a clear schwa at the end of these words. All right. So we are interested in whether this schwa-like element is actually triggered by the tune. So to answer this question, we ran production experiments on a variety of body Italian. And in our production study, speakers had to pronounce simply English names that end on a consonant, such as Bill, Carol, Edith, Jeff. And these names were embedded in dialogues with different pragmatic functions. There were yes-no questions that are prototypically realized with a rising tone on the stressed syllable of the final word, indicated by the blue box here, followed by a low or rising tone. Okay. And the same sentence as an answer, as a declaration of information, is realized with a falling tone on the stressed syllable of the final word. Right. Now, if the tune is driving word final vowel insertion, we would expect more schwas in questions than in statements because the rise, fall, rise needs more space to be realized. And we would also expect that monosyllabic words elicit more schwa than disyllabic words because two syllables offer simply more phonetic space to realize pitch. Okay. Before we look at the numbers, let's again get a feel for these contours in Italian. Here on the left-hand side, you see questions. On the right-hand side, you see statements again. Let's listen to the first question case.
Ha chiamato Carol?
And the statement.
Ha chiamato Carol.
Right, so we have a rise on the stressed syllable in the question case, and this the fall rise on the final syllable in this case. Now, what happens when there's only one syllable, like bill? Here's the case of bill. Let's listen to that too.
Ha chiamato Bill? Ha chiamato Bill.
Right, and you can see in the question case, and there's a really nice example, you have the rise, fall, and pitch on bill, and then you have the rising component on the schwa that is inserted after bill, right? Now, did the tune drive vowel insertion in Italian? Speakers produced more schwa in contexts in which the realization of the tune is compromised. So this is the case in monosyllabic words, so the blue bars are above the red bars, in which there's only one syllable to host a potentially complex tonal movement. And it's particularly the case in questions in which there's a complex final rise, fall, rise. So, the left-hand columns are higher than the right-hand columns. And obviously, it's worth noting here that the baseline of vowel insertion is already quite high, as you can see, but a substantial amount of variability is accounted for by the tune, the syllable number, and the interaction of them. So our data on Italian show us that these interactions between tune and text happen right under our nose, even in well-documented languages. The tune drives the text and creates environments that are optimal for the transmission of the communicatively relevant melody. Now, again, the question, how common are these cases, these interactions between tune and text actually? So in a recent paper, we reviewed many cases across unrelated languages that show evidence for text adjustments in light of impoverished tune context. Many languages actually show systematic phonetic variability in these scenarios. We found evidence for vowel insertion possibly triggered by intonationally relevant context across a variety of languages across the Mediterranean Sea. And obviously here we need to make a caveat. Looking at the map here, these patterns might be an effect of a particular geographic area which has been subject to a lot of contact, and most of these languages are also closely related. But keep in mind, phonological descriptions and experimental work, specifically beyond word level phenomena, are still sparse. So this pattern might reflect simply a selection bias of our linguistic documentation. Many languages have been reported to lengthen bona fide vowel in light of tune text conflicts, right? So when there is a tune to be realized, vowels have been reported to be lengthened. And just as certain contexts favor the addition of a vowel to the segmental string, these same sort of contexts tend to disfavor vowel devoicing or vowel deletion. Since vowels with full voicing are optimal for the realization of pitch movements, devoicing or deleting them would obviously make the retrieval of intonational meaning more difficult. So in positions in which there is communicatively relevant tonal movement, there is less vowel devoicing and less deletion. So all in all, I think we're looking at suggestive cross-linguistic evidence here that there are at least systematic interactions between tune and text, that they are common enough to take them seriously and think about them, what they could mean for the way that languages look. So here we are. I told you all kinds of things about how functional pressure to realize pitch might lead to phonetic variability, maybe even stable phonological alternations, but my title promised more than that, right? My title promised melody shaping grammar. So in the following, I want to show you that these interactions between tune and text might actually have a bigger impact on linguistic systems as we might think. I will show you that they might be involved in understanding why certain morphemes look the way they look. And that is work with the wonderful Marton Shashkuti from UBC. We looked at vocative constructions. Usually vocative constructions have the function of controlling someone's attention or simply calling somebody. So when you want to call someone or address someone in a conversation, you use a dedicated construction for this in some languages. Many languages mark vocatives grammatically by using a dedicated morpheme or particle. And you might be familiar with grammatical vocatives in Latin, for example. It's a classic case. The wolf lupus become lupe if used to address or call out the wolf. So the E is the vocative marker at the end. And here's another example from Manambu, a language spoken in Papua New Guinea. When addressing someone, you must add a dedicated suffix to the word stem. So walu becomes walupe. Probably more familiar to most of you though, vocative construction also often come with a specific tune, which is known as a vocative chant or calling contour. And this tune usually consists of a rising element followed by a sustained mid to high plateau in pitch, something like this. So let's listen to this case from Spanish.
Harina.
This is actually exactly how I call out people in German. That's exactly how my wife is calling out people in American English. I think it's the same in Hungary and in many other languages. Such a tune like this can only obviously be perceived on sounds that are periodic and harmonic enough to carry this pitch pattern. So the text needs to be tune friendly. We talked about that. And it turns out languages tend to make the text more tune friendly in vocatives. First, vocative constructions tend to have untypical sound patterns. Here are some examples. Several languages lengthen the stem final vowel in vocatives, such as Sardinian, Mani, and Kannada. In Chukchi, a language spoken in Siberia, reduced vowels are promoted to full vowels in vocatives. European Portuguese and Nujal report that non-lexical vowels are inserted in vocatives, similar to the case that we discussed for Tashlahit. And all of these changes clearly make the vocative noun more tune-friendly. Now, if the tune drives the text, what the claim that I'm making here is we would assume that nouns inflected for the vocative should be tune-friendlier. So this dedicated vocative marker in many languages should be particularly tune-friendly. Funny, because some researchers already have uttered this particular intuition about it. Daniel and Spencer note in their handbook article that a remarkably robust observation is that the vocative doesn't seem to be marked by any consonant in any language that we know of. So unlike other morphological categories, vocatives tend to be expressed mostly by adding vowels. What are vowels? Well, vowels are sounds with high periodic energy, perfect carriers of the tune. So we put this impressionistic observation to the test. We did a literature research search on collected data from over 100 languages across 46 language families that have been described with grammatical vocatives. That means we literally sat down in a library and went through hundreds of grammars by hand. We wrote down segmental information about vocative markers and compared them to a control group, structural case markers. So grammatical case markers that express syntactic relationships. We focused here on grammatical case markers that mark the direct object of transitive verbs. So most commonly we looked at accusatives, ergatives, and such categories. And these are really just a control category because we do not have any reason to believe they should be particularly tune-friendly. We then compared the sound structures of these two forms against each other across all these languages using Bayesian parameter estimation. And I want to share with you a particular finding that we found very interesting. Here you see two world maps that show all languages in our corpus. On the left-hand side, you see the structural case markers, our control. And on the right-hand side, you see vocative forms. And points are colored, as you can see, and the color indicates how many of the forms of a language contain a consonant, right? So a fully red, like a red point, like this one, means that all forms that we extracted for that language have at least one consonant, okay? Blue points mean that no forms of that language has a consonant. Since consonants are not tune-friendly, but vowels are, we would expect vocatives to have more blue points than the control group. And just eyeballing these two maps, I hope you can see that this seems to be the case, actually. For example, West Greenlandic uses particles to express structural case and vocatives. The vocative form is a long A, and a tune-friendly marker, of course. The control marker for the structural case markers is either a P, up, T, or it. Each individual form has a consonant. Now, our statistical model takes into account that some languages of our sample are not only related, genetically related, but that some share certain geographic territories, areas. So what does our model tell us about this relationship quantitatively? Here I plotted the proportion of consonants on the y-axis for both control and vocative forms. Individual bubbles correspond to the average proportion of forms with at least one consonant in a language family. The size of the bubble corresponds to the number of languages in that language family. And the large points with the bold margins here represent our model estimates, and the whiskers correspond to 95% credible intervals. And our model estimates that when you are a vocative, you have a consonant in your form in only 40% of all cases. In our control group of structural case markers, the amount of forms of a consonant is 85%. That's a huge, huge difference. So our results show that vocative markers are substantially more tune-friendly than other grammatical markers, raising the possibility that many of these markers are a result of tune-driven adjustments to the segmental material. Analyzing a large corpus here of languages and using statistical methods allowing us to quantify these important impressionistic observations made by other researchers in the literature. And this is, to our knowledge, the first evidence that the nature of pitch transmission might actually influence the form of grammatical markers. The tune drives the text, in this case, the shape of certain morphemes. And here is what we think is going on, what the mechanism is. As I've outlined earlier, there is a lot of communicative pressure to fully realize the vocative tune. If it cannot be realized, its pragmatic function might be lost. So if we were to call our cat in a vocative construction, the vocative tune would be compromised to some extent. Now, speakers produce these forms with minor in-the-moment phonetic adjustments to resolve this conflict. For example, some languages insert a non-lexical vowel, like we saw for Tashlahit in Italian. One possible source of this adjustment on the phonetic side of things is a misinterpretation of a consonantal release as a vowel. Now, over time, this small but systematic bias, this systematic phonetic variation, may end up being reinterpreted, reanalyzed as a morphological marker finding its way into grammar through a process of morphologization. Okay, we're approaching the end of my time here. What did we learn? Ultimately, most of us want to explain why languages are the way they are. To do that, it's important to explore mechanisms for linguistic patterns. Right? And these mechanisms might be cognitive or social in nature, or they might be physical in nature, referring to properties of how humans transmit speech. And here I discussed one mechanism out of many that was to some extent based on the nature of the speech transmission process. The transmission of the tune of pitch requires a certain type of text. And the mechanism is also functional because adjusting the text can help listeners perceive the tune accurately and thus understand the speaker's communicative intention. I've shown you some experimental evidence that these adjustments happen in Tashlahit Berber and in Bari Italian. And finally, it is important to look at cross-linguistic patterns here. Segmental alternations driven by the tune are commonplace across genetically and geographically unrelated languages. And I've also shown you that recent evidence from a corpus study that in some cases, these interactions might lead to cross-linguistic asymmetries in the shape of morphemes. Vocative morphology turns out to be particularly tune-friendly, which is not surprising given the inherent link between vocatives and dedicated tunes. All in all, I hope I could demonstrate here that what I believe is a fruitful way of understanding human sound systems. We can only advance our understanding of why languages are the way they are by combining behavioral experiments, in-depth quantitative assessments of cross-linguistic patterns, and detailed models of how human communication really works within this physical, cognitive, and social environment. So I want to end where I started. Several scholars have speculated on the origins of speech, assigning a central role to rhythm and melody, and I've argued here that grammatical aspects of melody, what we refer to usually as intonation, may play an important role in shaping phonological systems and grammar. When studying humans, we should keep in mind that we are all singing apes, and we should take the interaction between words, the words we use and the melody we superimpose on these words into account. And when we do that, we can potentially reveal important insights into why sound systems are the way they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If you have any question, please send me a private message. The first question comes from Shigeto Kawahara at Keio University.
Thanks, Timo. This was great. I was going to ask, if you had any thoughts about Japanese high vowel devoicing.
I cannot hear you.
Oh.
I can hear him.
Oh, do you hear him?
I hear you, Shigeto, yeah.
Does everybody else hear me though? Oh, anyway, I was gonna ask, do you hear me, Seunghun?
I hear you.
Oh, okay, all right. Let me cut it short then.
Yep.
Why do languages have obstruents in the first place then?
Why do a language have obstruents in the first place?
Exactly. Why do they have to use consonants?
I mean, there are obviously many different functional biases that come into play to shape sound systems, and I mean, the combinatorial nature of language is an important one. We want to express many lexical concepts without confusing them, and consonants obviously help us tremendously in combining different perceptual events into words, such that we can easily build a lexicon and expressively communicate with each other. So from that perspective, they're incredibly helpful because they distinguish also. They're just perceptually so different from vowels, helping us to combine segments into larger units. But from a purely melodic perspective, they interrupt a signal that is, in this case, melody, that might actually play also a functional role. And it seems like sound systems and languages really negotiate this very complex combination of channels, the acoustic channel, that is, that consists of different levels of acoustic information, which not always go well together. Like, for example, pitch and other spectral properties that are very characteristic of sounds. So here, I want to really emphasize that what I'm arguing for here is that there's a small bias in the way that we transmit speech and the way we use this acoustic channel to express meaning that might lead, probabilistically might lead to certain languages develop certain structures, right? So it's not explaining everything. There are many other biases and functional conflicts that need to be resolved. And this is just a small bias that explains certain niches of sound systems.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Next question comes from Adam Chong, Queen Mary, University of London.
Hi, Timo. Thanks so much. That was a really interesting talk. I kind of want to actually pick up on what Shigeto. Can everyone hear me? Sorry, just really quickly.
Yes.
I hear you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so Shigeto kind of hinted at the same kind of general question I have. And so it strikes me that, like, the fact that the text is changing for the tune to accommodate the tune, right? It's only one of it's like one of the options, right? So, and we know that, for example, that contours can have different allotonic shapes, say, right? And so I guess one thing that I was trying to kind of think through was, why we don't see that, at least in your data, right? Is it something about the particular kinds of, say, like communicative functions of the kinds of constructions that kind of privileges pitch over, say, text, right? And how this also then generalizes to, how this might generalize or may not, right, to other kinds of types of tunes or constructions, right? And then also just in terms of, like, even within tones, the tonal inventories, you get tonal overlays, right? Where at different kinds of boundaries, right, the different tunes get overridden, right? So there's sort of this other pressure too. So I mean, I was just trying to think about how this all, like, what predicts what, and do we expect to see, say, tones moving, right, to kind of preserve themselves in some other way versus putting in a vowel, right? Because there could be other restrictions on that. So yeah, sorry, there's a lot there, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but you're like, both of you guys here really dive into the, the right questions. Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. First of all, there's the other direction that is possible and that is observed in many languages. That is the text shapes the tune, basically. If there's not enough space to realize the tune, there are certain mechanisms that languages have to kind of accommodate for that. Many of you have probably heard of truncation and compression, where I basically truncate a complex movement, or I realize it in a smaller time window in a compression case. But there are also more and more reports on tonal shifts. You alluded to that. For example, in touch heat, you have an alternative strategy. Instead of inserting a schwa, you can basically shift the rise fall that is characteristic of focus or a question. You shift it to the previous material, which is, you know, voiced enough, sonorous enough to realize the tonal movement. So there's definitely alternative conflict resolutions. Now the big question is really, why do some languages resolve the conflict in one way and the other languages do it the entire other way? And you also kind of gave a hint what your intuition is about that. There might be really asymmetries in functional load, right? So Italian, for example, can express the difference between a statement and a question purely by intonation. They don't have, they don't need to use a morphosyntactic construction to make that difference. So in this case, functional load is rather high of hearing the pitch movement to distinguish between a statement and a question. But if you have, for example, an obligatory marker at the beginning of the utterance that, you know, indicates this is going to be a polar question, then there is less strain on the listener to you know, distinguish a statement from a question, because they can already do it and don't need necessarily this additional segmental boost of the pitch signal to really understand what the speaker is intending to communicate. So, you know, at the moment of, right now, like, we've established that there are suggestive patterns, that there might be something going on, and now we have to understand why a particular language goes one route rather than the other. And I think the solution to that, or the answer to this question, lies in being able to quantify functional load of different aspects of the acoustic signal. So, you know, for example, how much functional load does a particular tonal movement really carry to express a certain thought, and how much functional load do the actual segments carry to communicate a particular lexical concept, and how do they actually weigh and scale against each other. So a really open question, really great question you asked there, and yeah, very difficult one to answer at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Timo. I think we should give him a big applause.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we will stop sharing the screen. And those who would like to continue some informal discussion, please come into the breakout room. It will be open for everyone. Otherwise, we will meet at 6 p.m. for the next talk by Adam Chong. The recording will be stopped now.